everyone, it's Leanne. Welcome to another video on my art channel. So today I'm doing something a little different. I'm creating my own watercolor journal. I've been doing watercolor off and on for about a year, I guess, but I haven't done it nearly as much, and I want to really practice, and I know it just takes practice to get better at it. So I haven't been able to find a small watercolor journal that I can throw in my bag. I just want something that I can take with me on the go, and so I don't feel so restricted to having to work at my desk or lug around a big sketchbook. I do have a watercolor sketchbook. It's, I think, 9 by 12. It's pretty big. So I want to create something that's small, and I haven't been able to find anything. I know Moleskine has a pocket one, but the pages are yellow, and I want something bright white. So I'm making my own, and I'm using a bookbinding video I found on C Lemon's channel, and I'm going to link that in the description, and I'll link it in a card as well in the video. So I just want to show you the process that I'm doing and kind of my thoughts behind what I'm or how I'm creating this watercolor journal, and then what I'm going to use it for. So I'm going to use the Strathmore watercolor cold pressed paper. This is a 300 series, and I bought this at Michael's. It's pretty much one of the only watercolor papers they sell. They do have Arches, and I think they have another version of this, but this is what I have on hand. So that's what I'm going to start with. Now this is 9 by 12, so I've decided that I'm going to cut it in half, so that would be 4.5 on each side, and then I'm going to divide this into 3 sections of 4 inches each way. That will give me a 4x4 journal with a 1/2 inch border to bind with. So I'm going to use 5 sheets. 5 sheets will give me 30 pages, and my challenge is to do a watercolor a day for a month. So I'm doing a 30-day watercolor challenge with myself. Ideally, I would like to do this over the course of a month, every single day, just creating something, just getting paint on paper and getting something practiced. So what I've done is I've ripped out the sheets that I want to use, and then I came in with my ruler and I measured little tick marks to the intervals of the page that I need to cut. And I did one first, and then I used that as a template, and I just lined each page up. They're all the same size, and then I just marked them where the tick marks matched, and now I'm just cutting them up. So I'm getting them ready for binding. Now I realized as I cut this, I marked the top and bottom of the paper, but now that I've cut it, I don't have the mark on the other side. So I'm going to measure out the same distance. It's 4.5, so I'm going to measure this out on this side and then just cut through those 3 pieces, and this will give me one complete sheet. Now I've changed the blade in my box cutter knife so it's super sharp, and I shouldn't have any trouble cutting through 3 layers of these papers. Once I have them all cut, I'm going to stack them together again and cut through them after they're bound as well, just to make sure that I have even edges for my book. These are pretty close. I can see where it overhangs a little bit, but this should be pretty good, and then I can trim it. One thing I did think about is this will give me 30 sheets, but I could paint on the reverse. I'm looking at this paper, and because it's cold press, it has a bit of texture here, no texture at all here, and I'm not so sure how I feel about that. I actually prefer the texture, so I might not do double-sided. I was thinking that I could divide this in half and create 2 books if I did front and back painting, but I don't think I'm going to. I think I'm just going to paint on the one page. So I'm going to keep going with how I have it. So now I have all my pages cut, and I've been evening them out, putting them together, and this is really thick. It's going to be a great little sketchbook to carry with me, but I did notice a few of the pages are not quite aligned. You can see there how I have a bit of a ragged edge. Some do stick out a little bit more than others, but this should be okay. I'm almost tempted to leave this like this. I kind of like this look. I think if I kept my one edge flush for where I'm going to bind them, that might be okay. I may trim this though, but I think it's pretty close. My measurements were pretty close. I'm pretty happy with this. So now, the next step, in C Lemon's video, she suggested using packing tape to put over the area where you're going to put the holes. I don't have any packing tape. I thought I did, but I don't. So I'm just going to skip that part. I'm not going to use this book very long. Hopefully I'm done in a month, and it shouldn't go through a lot of wear and tear. So I'm just going to go ahead and start making my holes, make my template for punching my holes, and get ready for sewing. Some of the supplies I picked up were these tapestry needles. These are size 20. I think it's 20 millimeters maybe, I'm not sure. Or maybe that's just a size for the needles themselves. The video also talked about getting the curved hook. They look like fish hooks. And I think those are actual bookbinding needles. They may be tapestry needles too, but they didn't have any at my local craft store, so I just picked up these. And I got 5 or 6 in this package. You want just enough so that each template hole has its own needles so that you can keep threading it and you don't have to switch needles between the threads. I also picked up this embroidery floss, and this is what I'm going to use to bind the book with. So I picked up these 3 colors. I thought they were really pretty. There's a few other things that are suggested in C Lemon's video to use. One of them is using beeswax to coat the embroidery floss if you aren't able to get bookbinding thread. I checked at the craft store, and for a block about this size and about this thick of beeswax was $30. I didn't want to spend that much. I tried to find the smaller wheel waxer in the jewelry section. There was none there. But I did find some old beeswax from candle making that I did years ago. So I may try just softening this up, just working it and making like a ball or something. I may try waxing the embroidery floss. The main reason to do that is to keep the floss firm so it's easy to stitch with. But I'm not overly concerned. I think I'll be okay just with this, but I may give the wax a try. The other thing I'm going to need is a cover for my journal. So I saved this mixed media notepad, and I'm just going to use the cardboard out of the back, and I'm going to cut a book or a cover for my book the size of my pages, and then I'm going to coat it with this wrapping paper I got at the dollar store from Christmas. Has cute little birds on it, so I thought that would make a nice cover. So that's what I'm going to work on next. So I'm going to cheat with this a little bit. I just took a page from one of the ones that I cut for my book. I'm just going to throw this up to the corner and mark the outside and cut this ×2. So I've cut it 2 pieces of paper, and it's generally about 3/4 of an inch or maybe an inch on each side. It's really rough right now. I want to get this glued down, and then I'm going to trim up the edges, make them nice and straight, and then I'll look at nicking the corners so that I can fold over the edges really clean. So I'm going to do this on my cutting mat just so I don't make a mess. I'm going to come in with some craft glue. It says it's tacky glue. It works really well. It's better than just basic white glue, I find. I have this piece of cardboard left over, and I'm going to use that to smear the glue down even on this surface. So I'm going to come in with a lucite roller. This is for just evening out anything you've glued to make sure that the glue is even and you don't get any bumps. So now I want to come in and just even up my edges so that when I fold this over and glue it, it's not going to look crooked and like it was cut with scissors, which is actually what I did. So I want to make it look really clean. I'm going to come in with my X-Acto knife and just tidy up these edges a bit. Normally the ruler wouldn't sit up high because of this cardboard. It's not sitting flush to the paper, so I'm not getting quite the clean edges that I was hoping for, but I'm not terribly worried about it. So now what I'm going to do is notch out these corners on an angle off the tip of the corner, and just so that when I glue this, the flaps will fold over and not get any puckering in the corners. Like when you wrap a present, you have to do the corners and you always have a gob of paper at the end. That's what I'm trying to prevent here. I'm not doing a 90-degree cut, maybe more of a 45-degree angle, just notching out a shallow point out of that corner. And now I'm going to come in with this tape roller I picked up at my craft store. This one's made by Elmer's. You can get them at the dollar store too. Pretty inexpensive. So I'm just going to fold this over the edge of the cardboard, like so, and push it into place. So I'm finding that I'm getting overhang on the notches, even at that shallow point. I'm thinking that maybe it should be 90-degree. I think I'm going to trim this one actually and make it that way. So I have my two covers finished. This was my front cover and I wasn't happy with how it was drying. There was just too much glue underneath it, and so I ripped that cover off and I cut a new piece and I centered a bird on the center here. So I used the tape roller to adhere it with, and I cut the edges clean and did notch outs at 90 degrees on the corners. And so I think this turned out really good and I'm happy with this. And then I have this little bird as my back cover. He seems okay. I didn't put as much glue on this one and it actually seems a lot better. And so I like this little white space because I might write the date of my watercolor journal and my name or something, maybe my contact details. Yeah, so now that I have these, I'm going to look at prepping the template for the holes next. I think I might just do 3 holes. I know in C. Lemon's video she mentions that if you have holes near the end of the edges of the book, that it seems more secure in the binding than if you were to center each template hole. So I might put 2 on near the edge and then 1 in the center because I have my 3 colors. So I have my holes done now in my covers. I decided to use the white cover with the space as my front page instead of my last page because I want to use every sheet in my book for watercolor. I don't want to use one as an intro page, so I'm going to write that is my watercolor journal with a date on the front, and then I have this little birdie on the back. So what I did is I measured in on this cover here first, and I measured, let's see, I came in just under ½ an inch, so probably 1/8 of an inch less than ½ an inch, so 3/8 of an inch. And then I came up from the bottom 3/4 of an inch, and then I put 1 in the middle. When I had this as my template, I used my, when I had this as my template, I used my awl and just went through the holes like this, and then I came back on the other side and just redid those holes to make sure they were nice and open. And then I put my first piece of paper down on the edge because I really want that sewn or stitched edge to be flush. So I did that, and then I came in with a 0.8 micron pen. It has the biggest nib that fit that hole without a lot of movement so that I could get a really precise pinpoint tip mark on that. So then I came through and popped this along and then used that as my guide, and then this became the template for all of the other pages. Because I have 30 pages, I did them in groups of 5, which went pretty well. My arm hurts from pushing the awl through all the watercolor paper, but I'm glad it's done now, so I have that all done. One thing to make sure is when you are going through that your watercolor paper all faces the same way. I made sure I went and updated all my pages before I did all of my punching so that all of the holes would be on the left side with the rough side up. That's the texture side I want to use. So now that I have these all set to go, I'm going to gather them up and get set to start stitching them. In C. Lemon's video, she talks about stitching it on the edge of a desk, and so that's so that this can overhang and you have room to work and feed the stitches through. So that's what I'm going to work on next. So I have my thread all cut now and measured out to my book. Now the recommended rule of thumb is to measure 1 page length per the amount of pages for each strand of thread. So I have 30 pages in my book, so I have went like this. Whoops. I went like this and counted 30 times. So that would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. And I did that until I got to 30. And then I cut every string the same length based on my first one as a template. I took some of my beeswax and I'm just trying to soften up the beeswax and mold it into something more soft where I can run my thread through it. It is kind of old. I've had this a long time, so it's kind of brittle and dry, but it is still really tacky and I have a lot of wax on my hand now. It doesn't feel very good, but I want to try running the thread over it. That just helps with tangling and it helps preserve the thread as well, give it a little longevity. So I'm going to try that. What I need to do first is separate this thread. So on C. Lemon's site, she suggests using 2-ply embroidery thread. You can see that there's 5 strands of string here, so I'm going to separate this out into 2. I usually just start to separate it and see where the natural separation is, and try not to just pick 2. Try to pick the 2 outside ones so it unravels a little bit easier. Sometimes this can be not that fun to do, but it looks like those are pretty grouped together. So you want, when you're unraveling this, to put pressure on all 3 edges. If you don't, it will tangle. And I have to do this when I do cross stitching too. If you've embroidered or done cross stitching, this is probably very familiar to you. So I'm just going to go through all my threads like this, and then once I have them separated out, I will just string them out a few times to get the twists and turns out of them, and then I'm going to run them over the beeswax and see if that helps to get them a little bit more sticky and firm. So the thread is actually 6-ply, not 5. That was my mistake. So I've taken out 2 threads now, and I'm going to run them over the beeswax and see if I can make this make a difference. I'm not sure how this will go. Actually, I can feel the string cutting into the wax and it is coating it, so this is working. And it's great because I'm able to recycle some old materials I have left laying around. And you can notice the difference between this strand of thread, which is very tangled from being separated, and this one that's already been through the beeswax and it's sticking together. It's going to be much more manageable. So that made a pretty solid cut into the wax. It worked. It did exactly what I wanted it to do. I noticed a little knot formed in the end of my string here, which I might have to trim off, but I did allow a little extra when I cut it, so that should be okay. I'm going to go over this one more time. I think when I do my next string, I probably only need to do it once. I just want to make sure that it was coated. When I first started, I was a little putting a little less pressure on the wax ball, so I think that I could probably just do one pass and it would be fine. So I'm going to loosely wrap this up and set it aside for my bookbinding. And I'm going to do this to every strand of thread that I have. So I'm going to go through and separate them into a 2-ply thread, and then I will run them through my wax, and then I'll be ready for my stitching. So I have all of my thread done now. I did it through my ball of wax, my beeswax. I don't think you could use regular candle wax. I think it needs to be beeswax. I think there's a different compound that makes it up. But anyways, so I used the beeswax and I went through every thread twice. I ran it through my ball of wax, and I definitely recommend it. It took all the tangles out. You can see that it's more firm and stays together. You can't tell that this is 2 strands of thread. It just looks like one, so it should be a lot easier to work with. And so now I'm ready to set this up and begin stitching each page. So here's a look at my final book. It's all stitched together. I'm really happy with how it came out. I think it's going to be really exciting to have this custom size that I can carry around with me. When I have my sketchbook filled completely, my little watercolor journal here, I will do a video to show all of my drawings and creations. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Be sure to check out Lemon's video too for instructions on how to do the stitching and binding. If you did like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe so you're notified as I post more video. Thanks so much for watching.